Hi, 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 and hey, hey, and welcome to another edition of Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles videocast. This is a show that we do every 2 weeks on Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on our YouTube channel, where we talk about the Beatles' solo careers mainly. Every now and then, we may slip in talking about the Beatles as a group. In fact, we're going to be doing that combined on the show tonight. And I'm Ken Michaels, one of the four regular co-hosts of this show. Hopefully you know me for my syndicated Beatles radio program that I've been doing since March of 1982, called Every Little Thing, currently running on 50 radio stations. I also am co-host of another Beatles talk show podcast called Things We Said Today, and I have my own YouTube channel as well, Ken Michaels Radio, loaded with interviews on the Beatles, lots of Beatles content. I'm being joined by my three regulars on the show. First of all, we have someone, I got to admit, I was a little confused a few days ago when I watched the coronation and they said the king and the queen were going to be there. And I thought they made a big mistake because I was expecting a different queen. She's certainly the queen on this show and queen of Beatles social media. And she's also the author of several fine books, including Songs We Were Singing, Guided Tours Through the Beatles' Lesser Known Tracks, Michael Jackson FAQ, all the stuff to know about the king of pop, and also fandom in the Beatles. She also does lots of things online, great seminars on the history of rock and roll. She's also co-host of another Beatles podcast. We're all very, very busy here, all the co-hosts here. Toppermost of the Poppermost, she does, with Martin Quibell and Ed Chen. And that's our own Kit O'Toole. Hello, Kit.
Hello, Ken, Tom, Joe. Hi, everybody out there. Good to see you.
Okay, also we have with us Tom Hunyadi, who you know for being one half of the very popular solo Paul McCartney podcast called Two Legs, along with Andy Nichols. He's always cranking out shows at an alarming rate. You can't keep up with them all. We're surprised he has time for this show. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Ken. Good to see you. Joe, Kit, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you guys every other Monday. At least we try to do this every other Monday, you know. But this should be a interesting conversation tonight.
I think so. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Also, we have the very popular Joe Mayo, who has his own YouTube channel, Mean Mr. Mayo. He's anything but mean. He does all kinds of things, lots of shows on the Beatles, lots of things on popular culture, talks about films, does his own rants about things that he finds he has a problem with in today's society. He even makes weird faces like he just did. And Joe, how's it going?
Going great, Ken. Thank you so much. Hello, Kid. Hello, Tom. Good to be here as usual.
On tonight's show, we have a very interesting topic. I'm sure you've heard it been said many times where the Beatles are concerned, and not just the Beatles, but for other bands as well, the sum was greater than the parts. And we're going to debate that here on the show and get everyone's opinions on this. I have no idea what my co-hosts are going to say on this particular show. But, you know, for some people, this is like a moot point. How can you possibly even compare the Beatles as a group to their years as a solo artist? But for someone like myself who grew up on the Beatles first and really just was completely absorbed as a little kid on their years together, buying all their records, and then following the solo careers and seeing all the success that they had on their own, and following, as you know, the charts, and just being so impressed with the success that all four of them had, unlike any other band. I mean, this is a band where each individual member had successful hits, successful albums, and so much more. So is it just an obvious thing? They were still better when they were together. We're going to talk about that on the show this time out. And I'd be curious to find out from everybody watching what their thoughts are as we're talking about this. We're all very respectful here with our opinions and love to hear what all of you have to say on this. But first, we have a lot of Beatle news to get to. You'd be surprised how much there is. First of all, Ringo Starr and his all-star band just announced a fall tour. It will be with the same lineup that he's had for the last several years: Steve Lukather, Colin Hay, Edgar Winter, Warren Ham, Hamish Stewart, and Greg Bissonette. So far, no New York City area dates. I checked right before the show tonight. The tour starts on September the 17th in Ontario, California, not Canada, Ontario, California, and goes through Tucson, Albuquerque, Kansas City, St. Louis, Nashville, Clearwater, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Grand Rapids, Chicago. There was a note there that said, must see Kid O'Toole while I'm there.
Damn right.
Ringo. New Buffalo, Detroit, Charleston, Columbus, Little Rock, and the final date on October 13th in Thackerville in Oklahoma at the WinStar Casino. Now, do not confuse this with Ringo's spring U.S. tour, which actually starts May 19th, which is this Friday, and it runs through June 17th. For all the dates for the spring and fall concerts for Ringo, you can visit his website, which is ringostar.com. Pretty amazing. He usually does this a month at a time, somewhere between 15 to 20 dates. He's still keeping at it. Now, I wonder if you guys know about this. This will be a big surprise. I'll bet all three of you never heard this. But Ringo gave an interview to the San Diego Union Tribune to promote all of his activities, including the current tours. And one exciting bit of news he gave us is regarding new recordings he's working on. He said this year he's going to be doing 3 EPs.
Whoa, what a
Wow.
surprise.
He said he's already done one, and he's
Oh,
very
boy.
busy doing the next one now. And once again, Linda Perry is on it. You know Linda from being in Four Non-Blondes, and she wrote Coming Undone on one of the EPs, and the last one, she wrote Everyone and Everything. Ringo was quoted as saying, then, just by chance, T-Bone Burnett sent me this beautiful country song. It didn't fit with a rock EP, so I said, okay, now we'll do a country EP.
Oh,
Yes.
come on,
How
yeah.
about that?
Yes.
Wow, we finally.
He says, it's not like I plan anything. Life just happens and I have time right now. So fingers crossed, we may have 3 EPs coming from Ringo this year.
Cool.
It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Like the show.
Well, I mean,
And
we're
that's, you
already
know,
almost halfway over with this year. We better start getting them out soon.
Maybe
I'll
he'll
take
finish all
whatever
3.
whatever I can get from Ringo, I'll take. But I know there are people on my channel that often said, he better not release enough for one album and then put out 3 EPs. You know, I take them as I can get them, and if one of them is all country, that's really cool.
That's awesome.
For all of
About
us who have
time.
been yearning for a country album again from him, it's not a full album, but it's something.
We'll take it.
Now, one thing Ringo Starr has been doing a lot of in recent years is appearing on friends' albums, usually helping out on drums, playing on one track. He's played on the latest albums from Steve Lukather, Colin Hay, the brand new album from Ian Hunter, and now there's a new album coming from Nils Lofgren. And Ringo will be playing drums on what will be the first single called Ain't the Truth Enough, and he'll be singing on another track called We Better Find It. Doesn't say whether it's lead vocals from Ringo or background vocals. Nils, as I hope you know, was a member of Ringo's all-star bands in 1989 and 1992, and his new album called Mountains will be coming out July 21st. He's brought along some big guns to play on it, including Neil Young and the late David Crosby, and jazz bass legend Ron Carter.
Wow.
Okay. Some other news to get to here. As we have been hearing, the legendary Dolly Parton will have a new album coming out, which will feature an array of superstars, and it will be called Rockstar. Months ago, we learned that Paul McCartney will be recording with her, and indeed he will. But that's not all. Ringo Starr will also be on the record together. They will be on their new version of Let It Be. And the cover version will have special guests Peter Frampton and Mick Fleetwood playing on it. Mick Fleetwood makes me wonder, does that mean Ringo's not drumming? We'll have to wait and see. The album is due out November 17th. As part of the upcoming Tribeca Festival, Paul McCartney will be taking part in an interview to promote his new book of early Beatles photos, 1964, Eyes of the Storm. Conan O'Brien will be interviewing him on June the 15th at the OKX Theater at the BMCC TPAC. TPAC is Tribeca Performing Arts Center. That's on Chambers Street in New York. Paul's new book showcases 275 photos of the Beatles from late 1963 and early 1964 when Beatlemania erupted. The conversation will later air on Conan's podcast called Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. And I should point out that two guys who watched this show will be attending that interview. And hopefully we're going to have him here the Monday following the interview with Paul with Conan O'Brien. Tom and James Liverani. They should be on this show. So I won't be here for that because I'll be on a vacation at the time, but you'll have two eyewitnesses to the interview with Conan O'Brien. Okay.
They're great. They're great people. They were there at the fest when we interviewed LJ. They were in the room with us, and I think Tom got on stage with, or James. No, I think James got on stage with Paul a few years back.
I think they
He's one
both
of the
did
lucky people. Yeah,
during
they both
during
did,
a
yeah.
sound
He
check.
played with,
Yeah.
well, absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that
Looking forward
alone,
to it.
that's a story to
Yeah.
itself. You got to have them talk about it here.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember that. Yep.
Among the new books coming out include That Was Me, Paul McCartney's Career and the Legacy of the Beatles by Richard D. Driver, which explores the impact of Paul McCartney as a musician outside the Beatles, identifying the continued excitement in generations of fans and listeners and his perennial efforts to perform and record music. Though rooted in biographical details of Paul McCartney, the book identifies a historical placement of musicians that since World War II, these are people who have been for decades making significant music from the 50s on up and World War II. Richard D. Driver shows how McCartney's solo career is multifaceted and extremely diverse, ranging from breaking sharply with the style and output of the Beatles to experimenting in orchestral and operatic music and returning to music designed to emulate and reproduce the style, success, and popularity of the Beatles. Through McCartney, we can literally and symbolically view and revisit the popular music phenomenon that was the Beatles and popular music from the 1950s to today. And this book comes out August the 15th. Another new one is called Dark Horse Records, the story of George Harrison's post-Beatles record label. It's by Aaron Badgley. The book tells the story of how, when the Beatles' Apple Records was winding down, George Harrison and Ringo Starr both wanted to help new artists. So rather than trying to salvage Apple Records, each ex-Beatle created their own label. Ringo Starr established Ringo Records, while George Harrison created Dark Horse Records, set up to be a much smaller scale label, releasing records from new artists as well as some of his old friends, with an eye to eventually releasing his own solo music. The book shares the label's history right up to the current time. And since the year 2020, Danny Harrison has taken over the reins and has made Dark Horse a viable label once again, signing Cat Stevens, Billy Idol, and releasing music from Joe Strummer and Leon Russell. And this year it was announced that Harrison's entire solo catalog was going to be re-released on Dark Horse. The book tells the story of the label from the beginning through its struggles and to its new and exciting renaissance. All right, some upcoming concerts to talk about. This is all happening this current week. The Carmine piece, Fernando Perdomo project. Fernando Perdomo we know from being on our show and helping to put together that tribute to Ram with Denny Seiwell called Ram On. And he'll be performing with Carmine at the Cutting Room tomorrow night at 7:30. Lawrence Juber will be at the same venue, the Cutting Room, this Wednesday at 7:30. Also, our good friend Gary Burr, together with his wife, Georgia Middleman. They're both great songwriters, both doing a lot in the country field. We know Gary, of course, from being with Ringo's Roundheads for many years, and with a lot of the albums made after the Mark Hudson Roundheads days. And they'll be performing at the Cutting Room this Friday. Jeff Slate, a good friend of ours that we've seen at the Fest for Beatle fans, he'll be doing a Bob Dylan birthday bash at Hill Country Barbecue in New York City this Friday night at 8 p.m. And the Weaklings will be playing at Daryl's house in Pauling, New York, and that's this Sunday at 7 p.m. Before we get to our main topic, do we want to talk about Chicago Fest?
Sure.
Okay, because it was just
Sure.
announced today. It'll be happening August 11th through the 13th at where it always does, the Hyatt Regency O'Hare. It's saying online that there is a pre-sale that has started right now for tickets. Guests include some of the same people that were just there at the New Jersey Fest. Patty Boyd. Billy J. Kramer was not there in New Jersey this time. He was there last year. Yeah. But he will be at the Chicago one. Joey Mullen, Terry Sylvester, Mark Rivera will be there again. Mm-hmm. Also, Greg Bissonette. Jay Bergen should show up, hopefully in person. Mm-hmm. I think he's healthy enough now.
Yeah.
He should be okay. My colleague, Alan Kozin, will be there to talk about the McCartney legacy, and our good friend Ken Womack as well. Okay, if you need more information, always go to thefest.com. Do note that Mark Lewison is not listed here as a guest. He was just there in New Jersey. Peter Asher is not listed. He was just there in New Jersey.
Mark is actually writing, taking time to write.
He's in a log cabin somewhere.
Yeah, he's locked himself in a log cabin somewhere, and he's writing volume 2 right now as we speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think all of us would like to say no one's going to disturb him.
Yes.
Have all the privacy you want, Mark. Okay.
Exactly.
So as I said earlier, our main topic tonight is this whole idea of, we've heard the phrase, the sum is greater than the parts. It's been used all the time with various artists, a lot of bands like the Beatles. I just saw an interview with Mickey Dolenz where he's talking about the Monkees, how the sum was greater than the parts. Does it really apply to the Beatles? And as I said just a few moments ago, as someone who observed and got to listen to all the solo music as it came out, as well as listening to all the Beatles stuff when it first came out, I was always impressed by all the success the Beatles had on their own. And watching the charts on a week-by-week basis, seeing all the big hits they had, seeing how well their albums did. I know there are a lot of first-generation fans that might have lost interest in the Beatles after they broke up, and maybe they follow them to some degree, but they weren't paying attention to the charts. There may be a lot of young fans now who thankfully are getting into the group that may not know how successful the Beatles solo careers were. But I always like to bring that up, and that's why I'm thankful that we have a show like this one and other podcast shows that delve deeply into the solo catalog like Two Legs does. So I just want to start this conversation by asking the three of you, well, have you gone through your experience as a Beatle fan thinking about this? The sum being greater than the parts. Have you not given it much thought? And really, does this issue even matter to you? I know it matters to me, but as the Kinks once said, I'm not like everybody else. So, Kit, why don't we start with you?
Well, I guess for years, I guess I considered the Beatles years and the solo years as, completely separate and almost like you can't compare them, that they were almost, two separate eras, and that it's almost, almost unfair to compare them in a way. Because, in many ways, and which is a great thing, that the solo years, yes, they sound, of course, they're going to sound Beatlesque. Obviously, many of the songs, but in other ways, which is great, in other ways, a lot of their songs don't sound that much like the Beatles.
Mhm.
You know, they really were able, obviously, to take, you know, their individual talents and do things that they couldn't do with the Beatles that I think would have sounded strange if they had tried. I mean, you know, John Lennon to me being the perfect example.
Mm.
You know, the some of the material, not all, but some of the material he did, particularly Plastic Ono Band. I mean, that
Right.
to me is the perfect example. I don't see the Beatles doing anything like Plastic Ono Band. I just think, you know, I just don't see it. I mean, his lyric writing, that stripped down production, um, I just don't see the Beatles as a group doing anything like that. You know, I just think it wasn't their genre as a group. So, um, for the most part, anyway.
Mhm.
Paul McCartney had his. I mean, again, some of his stuff was Beatlesque, but some of it wasn't. You know, some of it I don't see him recording with the band. And you know, same with George. He was able to dig even more heavily into spirituality, into world music.
Right.
And again, don't know if he could have done that with the band. He did some, but of course, when he went on his solo career, he did it even more.
Mhm.
So you know, so in some ways, I didn't really think about this as much because I just felt like for years it was almost apples and oranges, you know, that I felt like you couldn't compare the two, that they were two, the Beatles years, the solo years were separate,
Mm.
you know. So this is a very interesting topic that we're going to talk about tonight, because it's going to be hard to compare these. But as I said, this is the great thing about the solo years, that they did, you know, they didn't just repeat what
Right.
they did with the Beatles. I mean, and as we've been going along in this show, you know, and really digging even deeper into the solo catalogs, you really see that. You know, they really did, for the most part, avoid repeating themselves.
Yeah. I mean, we brought up a few times here on this show, you made the case of Plastic Ono Band. You know, I can't see Paul and George playing along to the songs on Plastic Ono Band.
No
I
way.
can't see John and Paul helping out George on the songs on All Things Must Pass,
No.
you know, or the very deeply spiritual stuff. I mean, you they did a little bit in the Beatle years with the Inner Light, with the three of them, John, Paul, and George, doing vocals, you know, and with I Love You Too, although Within You Without You was just George. But
Right.
yeah. And then Ringo did Sentimental Journey, you know, doing a departure like that and doing a lot of pre-rock and roll songs, which who knows what the Beatles might have done had they continued. But the
Right.
point is, it was something different, you
Mhm.
know. Tom,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I for one can see Goodnight on a song like Goodnight on Sentimental Journey. I can for one can see a song like Mother on, you know, on a Beatles. I think all of their solo material, one way or the other, can be incorporated into a Beatles album. And one album that I think proves that is Revolver. I mean, look at all the different genres of music that is on that album,
Hmm.
and they incorporated into a pop record. And I think that proves right there that they can do classical or garage or psychedelic or anything, um, you know, into an album. So when you guys say that, I kind of disagree a little bit. I can see where you guys are coming from, but I think in the back of their minds, I think they're always thinking, okay, well, we've kind of done something like this before in the past. I'm going to try to incorporate it into my solo career. I don't know. This is a fascinating topic. I haven't always
Mhm.
thought about something like this, but it does come up from time to time. I mean, there's that very popular thing that a lot of us did. Like, what if the Beatles never got, what if the Beatles never broke up? And then you take, songs from their albums and you
Hmm.
make a 1970 album or a 71 album or 72. And I think some of it fits. I can definitely make a case for, 10 songs from 1970 to 1972 that would rival any Beatles record. I mean, I think there's, fantastic stuff from throughout the whole 50, where we're at 53 years now of new
Mm.
material from the four. And I can see easily, we talk about songs that we think would be classics if they were a Beatles song, right? Weight of the World, I think
Uh-huh.
would be held as a classic. I mean, although it's already much appreciated in the Beatles community, but we're talking about those average fans, right? Those average listeners that sometimes listen and sometimes they don't. If it sounds like the Beatles, they'll buy it. You know, if it doesn't, you know, if it gets too political, maybe they won't
Mm.
buy it. A la, you know, give Ireland back to the Irish or stuff on New York City. You know, so I mean, I guess it's really up to the consumer. I mean, people are gonna, you know, they're gonna choose with their wallets, and then if they think that it, you know, it works, then they're not. I mean, why did they you know, their stuff go downhill in the 80s, and you know, why did Ringo lose popularity in you know, in the second half of the
Well,
70s?
we've talked
You know,
about that
you
here.
know, we,
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, we've talked about that, but the point is for me is I definitely, yeah, okay, we're all going to say that the sum is maybe greater than the parts, but how do you really look at that? How do you break that down? I would say that the sum is more consistent than the parts, but not necessarily always better than the sum.
Mhm.
So I mean, again, we can make our case as we go along with this, but yeah, I mean, I definitely have thought about, you know, this, and you know, you know, I'm a 73, so I didn't get to, you know, Ken, like you, I didn't, or Joe, or you know, we didn't get to see, you know, Beatles songs as in real time. So
Right.
you know, Kit and I, you know, we were getting
Yeah.
into Beatles and solo at the same time and
right.
enjoying them for what they were. I didn't necessarily care that they were solo or Beatle records. I loved the music,
Hmm.
and that really is the bottom line. If you love the music, who cares if it's solo or Beatles?
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly there, Tom, but not everybody sees it that way. And I love what you said
Right.
about Revolver. Look, the Beatles were so musically eclectic that they can master just
Yeah.
about anything. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I would also say that there's a lot of songs in the solo catalog that I really can't see the other Beatles joining that Beatle on because they probably wouldn't want to. It wouldn't be
Yeah,
something
but they
that they
didn't.
would feel
How many?
comfortable. It isn't a question of whether they can,
Right.
you know, it's
Right.
more what they would want represented for them as an artist.
But
Like, for example,
I
no, wait a second,
understand.
like silly love
Okay.
songs. Can you honestly see John and George? You know, Ringo is easy to get along with. He'll play with anybody. But can
But
you
it's
honestly
perfect as
see?
it is. It's perfect as it is.
Yeah,
No,
I know.
but obviously, I
With
think they
Linda
would
on
have
it.
their. I mean, if they were to stay together, they would have had their solo careers anyways. You know, so I
Well,
mean,
we
but I
don't.
can
You
definitely
don't know, you don't
see.
know that.
You know, but there was only Paul was the only one on Blackbird, right? I mean, there's going to be
Right,
times. There's going to be times when it's just going to be maybe just that one person. I think, and there was times in the Beatles history that it was just one or two of them, maybe even
or
three. You
three.
know, in the
It
studio
happened.
recording one song.
It happened a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So again, I don't necessarily think that just because a song like Mother isn't commercial or maybe you don't see them, I think it's possible that, you know, I look at, and then God, for example, I mean, we know Ringo's on it, and that's going to be another thing too. I mean, you know, how do we look at, you know, when a Beatle is helping another Beatle? I mean, I mean, look how giddy we get when we talk about those songs like Photograph, right? Or Don't
Uh-huh.
Come Easy, or, you know, other songs. I mean, you know, we can go into, you know, the 80s, like you know, So Bad or Take It Away. I mean, we watch those videos and we just get, you know, smiles on our face because there's two Beatles in a video, you know,
Hmm.
so, you know, but there's just so many ways that you can analyze this.
Oh, that's the beauty of this of this topic. You know, I mean, I've often said, you know, if you've got a Beatles song like the Ballad of John and Yoko that only has two
Yeah,
Beatles on it,
Right.
then what is Beautiful Night, which has
right.
Paul and Ringo on it? How is that different than a Beatles song? You know, you've got
Mhm.
to have, I guess it has to deal with what the other Beatles, what their input was on the record. But yeah, there's so many ways you can go with this
Yeah.
conversation, but for someone like myself, for the longest time, because it was a big influence on me, that book altogether now, the discography, which went all the way through 1975, it covered the group and it covered the solo in the same book. You know,
Mhm.
so to me, I looked at the group and the solo careers as all one catalog. You
Hmm.
know, Nowhere Man is a John Lennon song with the Beatles. Mind Games is a John Lennon song in a solo career. They're both John Lennon songs. The common thread is that you have the main songwriters. And Ringo developed into a very good songwriter too,
Mhm.
as well. Anyway, Joe, your thoughts about this? Do you ever,
You
you
kidding? At this point, go ahead.
ever...
Go ahead. Follow it up. What were you asking?
No, but did you ever think about this whole concept of the sum being greater than parts? Did it matter to you?
No, actually, because first of all, I love the solo music.
Hmm.
That's why I'm here. That's why I like to do this show, because I think a lot of this the solo music is not only underrated, but not always listened to in the first place.
Right.
You know, but having said that, I do think that the Beatles as a group. Come on, it's all four of them together. You got three great writers,
Hmm.
alone there. Ringo wrote some songs, but John, Paul, and George, the great writers all together, you know. And the thing about the solo years is though, I do think, as has been said here, there are some solo songs to me which are not only as good as the Beatles songs, but in some cases, taking individual songs,
Hmm.
I think are better. I can find solo songs that I think are better than certain Beatles songs. As far as technically, more pleasing to the ear or whatever. And that's
Right.
all a matter of personal opinion. But I've always championed the solo music. As far as whether or not having certain songs that the Beatles would have done had they still been together, a lot of people fans, they say, all those songs would have been Beatles songs.
Hmm.
All those songs. My Sweet Lord would have been a Beatles song. Imagine would have been a Beatles song. And all these. No, not always true, as I've said many times, right? We know. Maybe I'm amazed, I think, what it is because it's born out of the pain, a lot of it, of what was going on, and
Right.
Right.
Paul's discomfort, with the Beatles situation at that time and breaking up and all that. And God, are you gonna have the song God with I don't believe in Beatles at the end of it?
Hmm.
You're gonna would George be as spiritual? Would he be allowed to be as spiritual? Would he be doing something like "Hear Me, Lord" or "Art of Dying" or something like that, or "Waiting on You All"? If he's with the Beatles, those great songs, which
Hmm.
I think, so that argument doesn't always fly. That these would have been Beatles songs, only a little different because you'd have the four members on each track. Maybe in some cases, but not a lot of times. But yeah, as much as I do love the solo music and defend it constantly, I do think the Beatles, as a whole, is
Hmm.
is outstanding. You know, I think the Beatles music the songs go from good to great. Though with the solo stuff, I can find some that I feel are poor or weak to great. That's a difference for me. Unless you want to get into stuff like, stuff that doesn't really count with the Beatles, like Wild Honey Pie, or something like
Hmm.
that. Is that really like a song, or is that some kind of a segue? Is my name? Look up the number. Just having fun. I don't count those. The ones. Her Majesty.
Uh-huh.
You know the
Right.
ones everybody picks.
Yeah. You
Dig
kind
it.
of you kind of sound a bit like me.
Oh,
Well, no, seriously, I many times on this show I said Beatles songs, the group go from good to great. Even the songs that
right.
I like the least, I still like, and I would still consider them to be good. The solo careers, there's a few clunkers, for me. I like most of the solo catalog. But it kind of bothers me sometimes when there are fans who just wish that a lot of those solo songs were Beatles recordings and the Beatles backed up all of them. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they would be better. And what bothers me the most is that when they pick certain songs, like let's just say it's My Sweet Lord, the fact that you picked that song must mean that you like the George Harrison recording of the song. So you're liking the solo recordings of this music to begin with. So why don't you give credit, to the solo Beatles for putting out the music that way? At the same time, you've got It Don't Come Easy, which has George Harrison's sound all over it, produced the song, co-wrote the song. You could definitely hear, that being a Beatles recording more so than other ones as well. But yeah. Do you measure all the solo works up to what they did as a band?
No, not all the time.
I don't
I don't
think
think
so.
so. I don't think that's fair to do that.
Right.
No,
You
no.
know, they moved on. You know, I mean, look at, I think George was, you know, guys, you know, George and Paul in a way, even John. I mean, I think they all tried to get away from, you know, the way they recorded, you know, stuff. I mean, this the Plastic Ono band is just stripped down. I mean, that's probably what more or less what he was thinking for Let It Be, right? I mean, just to strip down, no production at all, in there. But yeah, I think definitely would say that you can't do that. I would
Mhm.
disagree
No,
with that.
somebody said that
Yeah.
once.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
well,
mean, my sweet lord, just mentioning that saying, you know, oh, would have been better if the Beatles had recorded that. I mean, see, to me, that drives me nuts when I hear that too, because I mean, to me, that is kind of an insult. Well, not kind of, it is an insult
it
to
Yes.
George,
is.
because
Yeah.
that whole album was such a statement
Mm.
for George, and it is so great the way it is. I mean, that was a personal statement that George made about, you know, his music, his vision, you know, his thoughts on, you know, spirituality, his thoughts on, you know, the musical direction he wanted to go in. Yes, I understand George played, or excuse me, uh, Ringo played on, you know, drums on some of it. You know, I get that there was some input, but it was George. You know, I mean,
Right.
that was George's statement. I don't want that to sound Beatlesque, and you know, it sounded so great the way it was. This was a, you know, this was a singular artist emerging, you know, from the Beatles and saying, all right, I'm going on to the next phase now, you know.
Right.
So I really don't compare that to the Beatles. That's what makes it so great, you know, that this was
Right.
him saying, you know, I've moved on from the boys. I've moved on from my old band. This is who I am now,
Uh,
you know. So
I
no,
Right.
want, I
I
want to,
don't compare it.
I want to add something about you might bring up, you know, like that album, All Things Must Pass. You know, I mean, let's say it. The question sometimes that I'm asked is, do I sometimes feel that there are any solo Beatles albums that are better than Beatle albums? And to that, I say no. In my opinion, I don't think even the greatest of solo Beatles albums, none of them are better than a Beatles album.
Mhm.
Which to me, in my opinion, shows the power of the four together
Mhm.
for that reason. But I will say there are a few that are albums that are as good as Beatles albums, and one of them is All Things Must Pass. For me, that's the first
Uh,
one. And now that you don't have all four of them working together on there, but I think how majestic that is and how wonderful and perfect and special that is near the quality
Mhm.
of a Beatles album.
right. Well, you know, the one thing that I like to say about comparing the two is that it's really difficult for me to say, you know, that all the Beatles albums as a group are better than all the solo albums. To me, I just like it all, genuinely like it all. And, you know, I have a great experience listening to all of them. And to
Yeah.
me, what's more important is not what's better, but whether or not it's worthwhile to listen to. And I find all the Beatles solo albums to be worthwhile. And there are plenty of times I'm more in the mood to hear solo albums than hear Beatle albums.
Oh yeah,
Now,
these days always for me.
do you listen to the solo Beatles more than the group,
I
Joe?
do. For me though, it's mostly because of it's not as played out for me. You know, not as tired, so to speak. Although the other day, I will say I had a long trip and I pulled out the White Album on CD for the first time in ages, and boy, did I love that album. The White Album is maybe their best album. All of them are the best albums, but so much variety and difference on there, and trying new things and experiments, and interesting the way the songs kind of blend into each other. Ah, it's a masterpiece. Okay, but generally speaking, if I'm going to go somewhere on a trip, I usually grab a solo disc
Hmm.
before, only because, as I say, the Beatles are kind of, I've heard them a lot. They're a little played out to me. But the longer I wait to hear something from the Beatles, like the White Album thing, I haven't heard Sergeant Pepper in its entirety since the 50th anniversary, 2017.
Mhm.
Hmm.
If I was to put that on, dedicated one, I'm just going to just drink it all in and no interruptions, I probably would be blown away again.
Right.
These guys are really great, wow, but it's all in here. So it's so much in here that
It's really a great experience sometimes when you listen to an album that you haven't listened to for a long time, and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
And maybe you hear things that you didn't hear before, or you have even more of an appreciation for it. And that can certainly happen with a lot of artists' music, but definitely in my case, because I'm always working on my Beatles shows, especially my radio show, I'm never too far away from it, where I
Yeah,
could say,
yeah.
well, I haven't listened to the White Album in 5 years. It's just not the case. But I know what you're saying. Tom, do you listen more to the solo these days than the group? And also, how much of the fact that you have a podcast that's mainly about solo McCartney, does that figure into it?
It figures a lot into it. I mean, especially with this podcast or video cast as well. I
Mhm.
mean, as long as we keep getting in or anniversaries, right? Remasters. I mean, we're constantly listening to solo stuff. Even like Let It Be, all the bonus songs. I mean, look how much we loved listening to the stuff that eventually became solo stuff.
Uh-huh.
That was on there. So yeah, I mean, listen, I've had many years listening to Beatles nonstop. I loved every minute of it.
Mhm.
Like Joe, I mean, that's the thing. It's funny. That's a very true statement that, when these box sets come out, we listen to them a couple times, we do the show, and then they're on the shelf. I mean, how often do we really go back and listen to them? I mean, obviously, you know, we did the Revolver show last year, right? So we wanted to pay attention to that. I even went back and listened to the Mono Revolver,
Mhm.
just to see if I could, hear the difference, or just see if there's anything different. But yeah, it's definitely solo Beatles for me. I mean, that has really taken over my life pretty much since, I would say probably 99 2000, since
Oh.
my uncle and I did our What If the Beatles Never Broke Up CDs, you know
That was the start of
solo
it all.
career. Yeah, it was the start of it all. I mean, because at that time I still hadn't listened to everything. And then, discovering, Wildlife, which blew me away. Discovering, Mind Games and Walls and Bridges, which I hadn't listened to yet. The whole thing,
Hmm.
I should say, at that point in time. It's really, I just fell in love with this stuff.
Hmm.
Mhm.
You raise a good point there, Tom. I think it applies to the group and the solo. These box sets, because you're learning so much about them in the bonus material and the evolution of certain songs and demos of songs, it gives you more of an appreciation, I think, for the music. I find myself, if I play anything from any of the box sets, it still is the bonus material instead of the actual albums. But the same
Mhm.
thing applies with the solo music too. And in this day and age, especially, and this I think applies so much more to the group. There's so much that's out there on the internet of isolated tracks, and you can
Yeah.
hear Ringo drumming on She Said, just his drums, and just Paul's bass on something, or, and it gives you even more of an appreciation when you hear that. So, but I sure am grateful these box sets are coming out. I hope more keep coming.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the Beatles are not making new music anymore. I mean, Paul and thankfully Ringo are. So obviously that's, and then when we get these box sets from John, and listening to these audio only tracks, or and just discovering his voice, and I mean, I thought that really, for me right now, it's where it's at.
Yeah.
Just discovering and listening to new music.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, it's, even though they're old songs, you're learning new stuff about it. So it still is new. It
Right.
doesn't have to be
Mhm.
brand new
Yes.
music. So,
Right. Yeah.
Kid, how about you? Do you listen to more of the group or the solo these days?
Yeah, I mean, probably a bit more of the solo. I mean, partially because, of course, we're doing this show. I mean, one of
Hmm.
the great things that I've really found about doing the show is, learning more about Ringo's solo catalog. Because I have to admit,
Hmm.
before we were doing this, I wasn't as heavily as into Ringo's solo work, and so since we've been doing this, I'm really happy to say, I mean, I've dug way deeper into it and have found, some real buried treasures
Mm.
that I didn't know about until we did this. So I've really been listening to more of that, and yeah, because I think I've said it before on this show. I mean, I've listened to the Beatles. I mean, since I really started getting interested in them in the 80s. So I feel like they're in my DNA now. I mean, I feel like I know them so well that, yeah, I mean, there can be a little, fatigue factor, but yes, thank God for these box sets, because and Astro Jer pointed that out in the comments, that they've really, breathed some new life into these albums, because you
Sure.
get to experience all over again just how incredible the albums are. And and with the mixes, I mean, you'll hear some things. I mean, Sergeant Pepper in particular, I know I've said this before on our show, that I mean, that was an eye-opening experience for me to hear the remix, the new mix of Sergeant Pepper. And I mean, there were some details in there I'd never noticed before.
Right.
That I just I mean, I was so excited, and I just it made me fall in love with that album all over again. It gave me an even deeper appreciation of it. So I'll listen to that, and the outtakes, as you said. I love the
Right.
outtakes, and yes, these isolations that have popped up since the Rock Band game came out in,
Yeah.
was it 2009? I think it was.
Yep.
That have really enabled us to listen to isolated vocals, or Paul's bass. I love hearing the bass isolations, just to get a deeper appreciation of just how good a bassist he is. And so it does allow you to experience the music in a whole new way. But probably these days I do listen to the solo music a bit more, because it isn't, unfortunately, played as often as like on the Beatles channel, for example, on Sirius XM. I mean, every time I tune into it, and I don't listen to it all the time, by the way, but it just seems like, Joe, you've talked about this too, that whenever you tune into it, it tends to be same old stuff.
Yeah, I had to cancel my subscription a couple of times. A few times. I like the shows that are on there.
Yeah.
The talk shows,
I agree.
things like that. And Chris Carter, of course. But overall, I really was becoming anti-Beatles after a while, listening to that all during the day in the car, and various trips, and back and forth to work. And I was like, no, I don't want to hear "Can't Buy Me Love" ever again. I don't want to hear "Hey
Yep.
Jude" ever again. Come Together, et cetera, et cetera. I don't really mean that, but you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
I mean, you love the music, of course.
It makes you, yeah, and that's the thing. Without putting the Beatles on anyway, you get your fill somewhere. It's everywhere. It's on. You put on the regular. I put on the AM radio. There's Beatles songs on there, and you hear it. You put Ken's show on. Ken Michaels.
Thank you.
You hear it. No, I mean, no, because the stuff's out there anyway, in a way, without even having to dedicate.
Well,
I
I would beg to differ, because I don't think the Beatles music is played that much on the radio now, because commercial radio, they're not going to play that much from the 60s period.
Sadly,
yeah.
Sadly, true about
and
the
even,
Beatles.
Sad but true.
Gradually every decade you're hearing less and less and less, because they don't want to appeal to what they consider an older demographic listening. But
they should.
For the longest time, and this was even when I first started doing my Beatles show, I would always put together compilations of Beatles music in those days on cassette, and I would mix the group and the solo together. And that's how I listened to the music of it. I didn't really separate the two. And to this day, if there's any kind of presentation on the Beatles where it's strictly the group, it's like, come on, move on a little bit. There's so much other music that was done, whether you consider 1970 the starting point, or 68, with the solo careers. I get that way whenever I listen to any radio show on the Beatles, or even tribute bands. I wish they'd mix the solo with the group. But anyway, how important to you guys is the success that they had commercially? Does that matter at all to you? Because some people don't care about the charts, they don't care about the sales. sales don't always necessarily reflect quality in the eyes of some people. But I mean, you look at the 70s, the Beatles dominated the charts, the singles charts and the album charts. In the 70s, the four of them, even though John took that break for 5 years. And then in the 80s, continued success, not nearly as much as in the 70s. And still, you have some chart success today with Paul. How important is all that to you, in the grand scheme of things, in the way that people should view this music? Should they give it a lot more respect because of the fact that they did so well? Tom?
I mean, I think it matters a little bit to be commercially successful, maybe. Again, we're I think our community is shrinking and whatnot. So, I mean, to like maybe have Paul come out with, say, something like New or Memory Almost Full, which is kind of exciting and upbeat and trying new things, which I know not a lot of people like, when he, maybe does something like For You or, something like that. But I think that they need to appeal to younger people as the decades continue, and the older generations unfortunately dwindle. They need to find a way to stay relevant, and you do that by getting younger producers, right? You get younger talent to help you record an album. So in a way, sometimes it does. But hey, if it's good to my ears, I don't care if it's George Martin producing them, or was it Tedder, right? Was that his last
Ryan
name?
Tedder.
It doesn't matter to me, just as long as it's good to my ears. And then the commercial, if it's successfully commercially, then that's just the cherry on the top. And then maybe those people that say, oh well, he hasn't done anything good since Tug of War, or those people need to cool it, and just enjoy the music for what it is. Okay. Unfortunately, that sound that we love with Linda and Denny doing backing vocals, that's not coming back, right?
Yeah.
That's over, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So you look at stuff like Riding the Vanity Fair, or New, or Dance Tonight. Those are, to me, are important tracks that people who say they're fans should listen to and enjoy, whether it's commercial or not.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I go on about the charts a lot, and I know that
Yeah.
you're into the charts too, Tom. So that's
Yeah.
why I
Yeah.
bring that up. Joe, I
Yeah.
don't want you to be last this time.
Yeah, you always do that. When I want to be last, when I want to have time to think about it, then you put me first. No, but some of the things Tom was saying, I want to bounce off some of them, like Tedder, talking about like newer sound. I'm still trying to grasp that, in the sense that who who wants to cater to the 2023 sound in this day and age? First of all, I don't think 2023 is anything to get really gung ho about. I say don't dumb it down for today's youth. Let them go more sophisticated and listen to the great older stuff, and appreciate it for what it was in its day. But and Paul having hits this, Tom, when you were talking, I'm thinking like I want Paul to have hits. Ringo, oh boy, I thought Here's to the Night. Is that the name? Hit to the Nights.
Here's to the
Here's
night.
to the
Yes.
Nights.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
I said before, I thought that was like an opportunity, if they promoted that right, to maybe to have like a New Year's Eve kind of thing.
Yeah.
But is it really realistic to expect Paul or Ringo these days anymore? I know this is very controversial, to
No,
have a big hit with the youth anymore. I wonder about that. They're in their 80s and stuff. It would be amazing. It would be terrific. But I wonder if it's realistic anymore. I don't
it's
know if
not.
Paul could write that
No.
certain song, maybe, but I don't know. Maybe Ringo with country, if he had a really good country song with
Yeah.
the
It's
country charts.
Well, it has to have the
country
industry
is
has
not what
to
it was.
Hmm.
the
Sorry.
industry
Well,
has to promote
yeah.
and target it towards young people. I mean, you see, I mean, Paul in particular has promoted his stuff so much, with all the
Yeah.
concerts that he did. Think about Egypt Station, all the different concerts he did
Oh, he did
for that.
fantastic
But
going
it
out
doesn't
there.
mean anything if radio's not playing him.
No,
You
right.
know,
About radio not playing it. Although I do remember hearing "Come On to Me" on the regular radio one time out of nowhere, which I thought was amazing.
uh-huh.
And it's so rare these days, but I loved hearing that. Um, but I don't know. I just wonder if it can be done anymore like that. I mean, I always wanted them to have hits back in the day. I mean, sure, always. I mean, the '70s, the '80s, the '90s. I was just listening to a replay of the Ed Sullivan Theater up close show that I
Hmm.
was at in 1992 with Paul, and he's introducing
I
"Off
was
the
there.
Ground" song. Yeah, yeah, I was there. Not
Yeah.
as close as I was, but anyway.
I
But
I agree. I think chart success now is a non-factor. However, you can still appeal to a younger crowd, and I
But can I
think
just say
sometimes
finish my
when you
thought there
Hmm.
for a sec?
yeah
I just wanted to
yeah
finish my thought, but like when "Hope of Deliverance" came on, I remember him saying, this is good single from our upcoming album, and I
Hmm.
thought it was great, even hearing it the first time there. And I remember saying to Paul, "Number one, Paul," and it wasn't. It didn't do well at all, that single.
No, it
No.
I
didn't.
think the times are in the U.S. You know,
Hmm.
especially I'm talking. The times, I guess, are there. If that was a 1975 song, I'll bet you it would have been number one.
Could be.
Yeah, we brought that up here time and time
Yeah.
yeah we
again.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
But I was also referring to the chart success that they had in the 70s and the 80s. How much does that
Yeah,
matter to you? Is that, as I usually say, affirmation of the public really liking the music when it was played to them and to a younger audience?
I
Is that
think
a
so.
statement
well,
to
I mean,
you? Does it matter?
yeah, well, being that I didn't get into until the '80s, and then I went backwards. So it
Yeah.
didn't matter to me what they did chart wise in the '70s. I just knew I liked the music.
Right.
So
Mhm.
what did the charts matter to me? I was happy to see got my mind set on you go to number one. I was
Yeah.
Right.
ecstatic,
Hmm.
but that wasn't gonna ruin the song for me.
Right,
Right.
right.
You know,
Yeah, the qual we all would agree, right? A song doesn't have to be a hit for it to be a great song. Somebody
Absolutely.
like
right.
"Weight of the World," which Tom mentioned before, should have been a hit.
Yeah.
Might
Yeah.
have said top 20, maybe something like
Mhm.
that. It wasn't, didn't do anything. Doesn't mean it's not a good song. So obviously, it doesn't have to be a hit to be a good song. Some of the best songs aren't hits.
Right.
Bob Dylan had a lot of great songs that aren't number one
Yeah.
hits, right? But yeah, but do I like it in the '70s? Yeah, I did. Do I think that it's a testament to how good this stuff is? Yes, I do. I think that as Paul went on in his career, I mean, the songs that became big hits were hits because it was good. The singles,
Mhm.
they were good songs.
Yeah.
I often say, well, I think the albums sometimes some of the earlier albums, they were still buying it because it was a Beatle, but I do think that the songs stood on their own. We know Ringo's hits that he had in the '70s, George as well. "Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth," and "My Sweet Lord." This is all quality material. John, not so much. Because I still think with John, the problem was I still think he had a reputation, and people weren't accepting of him as much as the others, I believe. But stuff like, well, Instant Karma did okay, but
Sure did.
should have been
Yep.
bigger. But
Number
and
three.
so yeah, and Imagine. I mean,
Imagine should have been
obviously,
bigger.
Mhm.
Yeah.
but I just think it was in his case. I think maybe not trying to play the John card again. I'm just saying. I honestly think even in the '70s, John, like he offended a lot of people or turned off people, and the whole Yoko thing. I think that was part of it.
Uh-huh.
I just want to jump in and say, one thing, and I'm sure all of you out there watching, listening to this, have heard the same thing, the people who say, oh, Paul didn't record anything of significance since Tug of War. And, and of course, yeah, I say the look on Ken's face already, and I think the same thing because I mean, you know, Flaming Pie, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, Memory Almost Full, one that I advocate for. I
Mm.
mean, those are some of the best albums that he did in his career. And were they big time charting albums? No, they definitely weren't, but they are incredible albums. I mean, some of his finest work, I think, and particularly in his later career. But
I agree.
yeah, because they didn't have big hits, and they didn't get the airplay they should have, partially because it's just the changing times. I mean that they just it wasn't the 70s anymore. Radio airplay is different and so forth. And but that doesn't mean, as you all have said, that it isn't good. And so so I don't know. I mean, if charts are, I mean, that's great that they all particularly had great success in the 70s and all. I mean, it shows, yes, they were successful solo artists, but it isn't the be all and end all. Paul is still doing great work, even though he's not number one anymore. Although I also want to point out, though, when he came out with Egypt Station, he definitely tried to promote it like crazy. I mean, he went on social media channels and did all that stuff, which I thought was smart. He did carpool karaoke. He did try to play the game as it is today.
Yeah, he's always played the game.
Yeah, exactly. And
he did it with the new album as well. He was
quite a lot.
Yep. So he did try to do that. But as you said, he's and now he's 80, and I mean, no, 20-year-olds are not going to buy his albums.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
just
the thing.
way it is.
Unfortunately, people do look at when I don't look and think, oh my God, these guys are so old. Now I don't think that. But if I was 16, 17, I might think, hey pops, hey grandpa, I'm not interested, maybe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, this is a great topic. It's a show to itself.
Yes.
You're talking about the charts and everything, and I always like to bring it up because it's just when they had the success, especially in the 70s, it's proof that when it was targeted to young people, that's how they responded to it. So it's only as the airplay dwindled, then the sales would become less. So that's just the natural thing that happens. And it's really tough for aging rock stars and pop stars to have hits again. I mean, the last time that Paul had a top 10 hit was when he teamed up with Kanye West and Rihanna. And it's because of that association that it became.
Doesn't count. That's a whole other debate.
Okay, we'll do another show.
Billy Preston had a number one with Get Back. Go.
Hey, his name is on there.
Yep. Someone's pointing out that they did still have hits in the 90s in other countries. And yes, we definitely
in other countries, absolutely.
We are talking about this absolutely from America. We understand, as you said, America isn't everything. We do understand that. We are taking this from an American perspective. So, we can't cover every country, because then this would be a multi-hour show. So we can't do that. So yes, we are definitely doing this from an American perspective because that's our perspective. So
it's an interesting thing too to take a look at singles and albums that did better in one country than another country, or you take a look at Paul's success with an album like Pipes of Peace and Give My Regards to Broad Street in the UK, and they weren't nearly as successful here in America.
Right.
So and We All Stand Together was a huge hit, and of course you had the biggest difference of all is Mull of Kintyre, which was a big hit worldwide in just about every country except the US. It wasn't just the UK.
Right.
But
well, they didn't even really promote it here, am I right? They
didn't think that it would be a hit because who was going to listen to a folk song with bagpipes? In America, that was
77.
Yeah.
They still won't play it in concert here, darn it.
Right. Why did anybody know? Does anybody know what Magneto and Titanium Man did in other countries?
Well, Kit's dying to know.
I'm dying to know.
I don't know if Kit was listening.
My favorite.
That was a B-side to one of the Venus and Mars. What's that?
B-side.
Yeah.
So now, can I propose a question to you guys?
Sure.
Unless you got
I'm not
something
marrying
else,
you.
Oh, I have a few more questions, but.
Oh no.
Do you guys think that, I mean, if it wasn't for the parts, I mean, if it wasn't for the sum, that the parts wouldn't have been as successful as they had, as they were,
Wow.
or as good? Like,
Ooh.
I got my hot take is I don't think Paul McCartney would have been as a great a songwriter as he was if it wasn't for being in the band with John Lennon. I don't know if John would be as great if it wasn't for Paul's assistant in with melody or
Well,
instrumentation.
that's interesting. You mean would they have been as
Look,
great in solo, or you mean as in general?
no. What I'm saying is without the sum, the parts wouldn't have
Oh!
been
I see what you're
anywhere
saying.
near as good if it wasn't for the fact that they were a sum.
I always wonder that about John and Paul, because I always think they needed each other pretty much in the early days, and I would say if there was anybody that was going to be something on his own, it would have been Paul, maybe. I think. I think he had the
Maybe.
talent, uh, but I don't know. That's it's so hard, right? Isn't it hard to when you know what the facts were as they played out to try to
Right.
imagine what it could have been like or would have been like otherwise?
That's
I wonder.
an impossible question to answer, but I probably would say, the Beatles weren't just a great band that put out great music. They were a training ground. They
Yeah.
learned from each other as musicians. They
Right.
learned from George Martin. They learned
That's
from the
right.
Right.
engineers that worked in the studio. And they developed styles of their own when they were in the Beatles, which they carried over into their solo careers while also making changes with the music,
Mhm.
and experimenting on their own. So, you listen to songs that Paul did in the early 70s, from the McCartney album and Ram and the acoustic stuff that I always like to bring up, Junk and Teddy Boy and Every Night and Heart of the Country and Mama's Little Girl. Well, he was doing I Will, and he was doing
Right.
Mother Nature's Son in the Beatles. So a lot of what the Beatles did in their solo careers, they learned and they copied some of the same things from their years together. But the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is, an important aspect here is that, Paul's career has endured all these many years. And you can't say that's just because he was a Beatle. It's because of all the music that he's done and all the success that he's had. And he's become such an incredible legend through everything that he's done. George's career lasted a long time. And I do believe if John was alive right now, he would continue to have success, not the same kind of success that he had in the 70s and through Double Fantasy, because again, the media and the industry wouldn't be promoting aging veterans, but
Mhm.
they'd still be putting out great music and still have a following, and it would be enduring and lasting to this day.
Mhm.
So no, there's so many circumstances. Would the Beatles have written the music that they wrote when they were together if they weren't that band? You know, that's some of the songs are because of the circumstances of what they were going through.
Uh,
Take the White Album. We wouldn't have had Dear Prudence if they didn't go to India.
Right.
We wouldn't have
Right.
had the
Yeah.
continuing story of Bungalow Bill if they didn't go to India.
yeah, but what's Honey Pie's excuse?
Doesn't need an excuse. It's a great song.
Mhm.
Just
I
playing.
I do think though that with
It's
Paul
his
and
dad's fault.
John's with Paul and John's songwriting partnership though, I think one of the things that at least early on that really helped was that they were able to tell each other, you know, that line
Mm,
doesn't work, and
right.
and I mean they could tell each other when something wasn't working or that sounds great. And I think when they both lost that, when the band broke up, that there was I think they both felt the loss in many ways. So I think that definitely was had an impact on their writing. I mean, I've said that many times. As far as George goes, hey, what a training ground
Mhm.
he had, as you
Yeah.
were saying.
Yeah.
So I think maybe training ground is the best. I agree with that phrase, Ken. I think
Hmm.
um, I don't know if they would have been the same artists if they hadn't all worked together beforehand. I mean, they obviously had that chemistry, and I think that they all did help each other learn. And yes, George Martin was certainly a big factor too. But I think that the fact that, particularly John and Paul had the guts to tell each other, this isn't working, we need to change this line, had a major impact on their writing style.
Right. One of the criticisms that's been made, especially where John and Paul is concerned about their solo careers, is this issue of overindulgence. That maybe Paul's music is a little too sappy, it needed an edge, and that's where John came in. And where John's music is concerned, maybe it was a little too acid, or, it needed to have its edges smoothed over from Paul and make it a little bit more commercial. Do you find that to be true? Have there been times when you've listened to a John Lennon solo song or a Paul McCartney solo song and thought, gee, I wish the other one was on it?
I can't think
You weren't
of any.
expecting these questions, were you?
Yeah,
I
that's
would have
interesting.
thought about it more if I knew that.
Sometimes I see that in social media a lot.
Yeah.
I wish John had helped Paul out with this song, or I wish Paul had helped John out with that song.
Well, I got to be honest again, not to show being biased, but I think more, if anything, I mostly noticed Paul songs that could have used a little John. I don't think I noticed so much John songs where I said, "Oh, gee, Paul should have been in there," to help that song as much. Solo songs.
Are you talking about with lyrics, or are you talking about providing an edge?
Lyrics, I guess lyrics a lot of times, mostly lyrics, all lyrics. Maybe that, it's not such a great lyric, kind of thing. But, I still think he did fine, he did fine. Paul, obviously, he has a tremendous successful career, and again, if this how this fits in, I don't know, but I wanted to say it again. The idea, all the solos, again, big songs that we know on the radio that were played, that were hit songs, didn't matter to me that they were in the Beatles, and I think they would have been hits even if they had never been the Beatles, if that makes sense. I mean, you could argue they wouldn't exist. Those songs in the solo canon wouldn't exist if they hadn't had the experience of being in the Beatles. But that's semantics. I'm saying just in general, as a song, listen to what the man said would have been a hit if they had never been the Beatles. I think, and stuff like that. Or Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey. They didn't have to be the Beatles for that to be the sound. Just this guy, Paul McCartney. Paul and Linda McCartney making a single. I think it would have been the same. The number one just as well.
Okay. Kit, what are your thoughts on this?
Boy, that's a tough question. I mean, there are times, of course, and I mean, I've said it on the show many times where I've heard some Paul songs where I've said, those lyrics sound unfinished, or wow, that's a, I think that lyric could have used some work, and it was more a case of, I wish that the producer had challenged him more, or something like that. Maybe not specifically John, although I would have hoped John would have stepped in and said, for you, get out of here. Get out of here with that one. Come on, you can do better than that.
I don't know. He might have liked that.
No, well, maybe he would. I don't know. Maybe he would have liked that.
He might have said, "Hey, coming up, that's. Oh, wait a minute."
Yeah.
You don't need all those berries in Feeding the Clouds. You don't need to say very, 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 very hard too many
times. So I mean, because I think of it more as he needs, to me, Paul needs somebody who can tell him the truth and has the guts to challenge him on some stuff. Not necessarily John himself.
Yeah, I got you. Somebody else sometimes.
Yeah, but somebody who, I mean, as I've said, that's why I think Chaos and Creation turned out so well, because that producer did. And Paul never worked with him again, but Nigel Godrich. Yeah, Paul never worked with him again, and that's probably why, because he did challenge him. But look what a great album that was. You know,
And to be fair to John, to be fair to Paul again, where John could have used him, maybe not so much in like lyrics or structure as much as in discipline.
Yeah.
Maybe to take more time on this. Don't
Right.
just let's get the hell out of here. Kind of thing.
Exactly.
Like you should take a bit more time. Maybe that kind of thing. Or
Yeah, could have
discipline.
done one more take or or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree. Yeah, some discipline in some cases. I think that's a good point.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well,
Any
we know what
songs you
happened
could
when they
think
got
of?
into the studio together.
I gotta think of them now.
Yeah.
They got me. Man, not really. I'm trying to be fair, but no. I don't know.
What was that, Tom?
So, well, we know what happened when they got into the studio together when John was helping Harry with
Ooh,
Oh yeah.
that was a
you
mess.
know, cute the
Snore in
snore.
74.
Yeah,
Oh, legendary.
Pussycats
That,
album.
that
Yeah.
sounds so, but it sounds they probably were all strung out for one thing.
Oh, it
Out.
was. Oh, I remember
Yeah.
picking that up, and I'm like, and Stevie Wonder too. This is gonna be epic.
Yeah. And I get
Oh,
the
it was
impression
epic,
that
all right.
epically insane.
Yeah.
And I get the impression that John, John's probably they're all awkward. Probably Paul and John probably feel estranged. John more than Paul, I think. And John is just yelling the things about where's the volume in the headphones? Come on, it's dead. It's like dead, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like just sing something. That you worried about the headphones. It's almost like he's stalling to me, John. He feels awkward. He's nervous. This is him and Paul again. I think John is kind of like uptight there.
Yeah.
But
All I remember was I spent money on this.
Yeah. Even in the May Pang movie, they play a little bit of it, very little bit. There's not much you can play.
Very little.
Tom, did you ever feel that you wish Paul was on a John record or John was on a Paul record to help each other out?
I mean, yeah, I think Paul would have said, hey, maybe put New York City out for the leadoff single instead of Woman is the end of the world.
That's a good one.
Maybe not be so controversial. Even though he did
down.
A controversial song too with Give Ireland Back to the Irish, but yeah, tone it down a little bit. Maybe make it a cleaner production, even if he wanted a more of a garage band sound to the album. I don't know, maybe he would have suggested a different, I'm gonna if you say, look, lads, if you do it this way, that's all I'm trying to say.
Put out Little Bo Peep. Lost her sheep.
Yeah. Sheep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, the three members of the band tried to stop him from doing that song. I don't think John would have succeeded either. So that's just where he was at the time. But yeah.
Paulina said John probably would have had Paul advise Paul to do, despite repeated warnings, make it nastier. Probably.
Yeah, maybe.
Now you see, I love the fact that
he
John
might have said, "Don't toe the line so much, Paul."
Yeah.
I love the fact that John did Cold Turkey by himself, because the other Beatles rejected it. They didn't want it to go out as the Beatles. So I agree with John's decision there. I wouldn't have minded if that went out as the Beatles. That's a great edgy rocker. But I guess they didn't want that to go with their image.
I like that it didn't. I like that he said, "I'm putting it out myself." Then.
Yeah.
Well, that's why, but still, there's a disagreement there as to whether or not, because John wanted it as a Beatles single.
Yeah, and Paul, I don't remember if George did too, but Paul always balked at it. I don't remember.
George, I'm pretty sure he didn't want it out.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see
Mary Jane also was a.
That's right.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That's the thing we were missing from this.
That's.
I mean, you got three of them playing on each other's album. The only one we didn't really get was John on a Paul or Paul on a John's. I mean, that's the only scenario we didn't really get.
Well, the only Paul on a George record is all those years ago.
Well, yeah, but it's still still on there. Yeah.
Just the backing vocals.
Yeah.
But I never felt this tremendous loss personally, where I wish that John had helped Paul out or wish Paul would help John out. To me, they were complete songwriters on their own. Every now and then there'd be an awkward lyric from Paul. I think John's lyrics for me were always just great. You know, I never had a problem with any of John's lyrics. Once in a while, I wish Paul would work a little bit harder on the lyrics, but for the most part, I accepted just about everything that he did lyrically. So that's the thing. When you go back to the Beatle years, that Lennon-McCartney relationship, and also the whole relationship of the four of them, and there's different levels of collaboration in everything. If you're talking about songwriting, there's songs that were 50-50 between John and Paul. There are songs that were more 80% John, 20% Paul, or 80% Paul, 20% John, and some that were 100% John or 100% Paul. And same thing with as musicians backing each other out. You know, there are times when you didn't have all four of them, or you know, one of them made a massive contribution with their instrument, whether it's a great part that Ringo played or a great guitar solo that George played. Every song is different, you know, and it's not like every single song, all four of them were together making contributions, but there were plenty of songs that were like that. And, you know, it's such an amazing thing to observe and to study after all these years, how they, as a group, came up with so much incredible material in such a short period of time. And like I said, different levels of collaboration on different songs. But that's one thing, that's probably the last thing I want to talk about here, because with me, I've often said that I'm very much a song man. To me, the song is the most important thing in a recording. And let me just tell the story, because I only said this on two legs, I think. There was one time only when I had the chance to talk to George Martin. And a friend of mine had set up this interview over the phone, and I knew my friend who did this was going to dominate the conversation. So I knew I'd only get a few words in there. But the one thing I wanted to make sure I said to George Martin was, I can't imagine what a song like Strawberry Fields Forever would have sounded like if anybody else had produced it. And without any hesitation, he said to me, Strawberry Fields is a great song before I had anything to do with it. And on the one hand, I thought he was being overly modest. But then if you think about it, he's right. To me, the reason why the Beatles music has endured all this time is because they're great songs first. And yes, the Beatles brought a lot to their songs. But even if you have the greatest bass player and the greatest drummer, if you have the greatest harmonies, the greatest guitar player, it don't amount to anything if the songs aren't good first.
Right.
And that's the magic of the Beatles, is the fact that the songs are great songs. And the reason why I love the solo music so much is because John and Paul continued to write great songs on their own. And then you've got this third guy there who was flourishing before our eyes by the end of the 60s in the Beatle years. And he continued to put out great stuff on his own. And then, to a lesser degree, but still a significant degree, Ringo developed into a decent songwriter. So you've got all these great songs. The question is, what matters more to you? How great the song is, or what everybody else is bringing to the table with it? And I love what the Beatles brought as a band to their own songs. It was magic. They had amazing chemistry. You might think it's not as exciting when it comes to the solo music, but hey, Jim Keltner's pretty good to me, and Klaus Voormann's pretty good to me. Gary Wright, Nicky Hopkins, all these great musicians, all the musicians in Wings I loved, the guys in Elephant's Memory I loved, all the session players that worked with the Beatles. I think they're fantastic. I love the arrangements of the solo music as well. Maybe not as much, I'm not sure, as the Beatles recordings, but the quality of the songs never went downhill. In fact, we got more great songs because you had more from George Harrison coming out as a solo artist. And then, you know, all the stuff that Ringo's done, and he's kept at it, as we just heard, 3 EPs, possibly this year. So, you know, that's probably the biggest reason why I love the solo stuff as much as I do. Is it better than the group? I don't really care. I just, like I said, it's all worthwhile to me. You know, there are plenty of times when I'd rather listen to a solo album over a Beatles album. There are plenty of times when I'd rather listen to a Beatles album over a solo album. So it all depends upon my mood, but there's so much great material coming from all four of them. And thankfully, we still have more coming from Paul and Ringo. And who knows what we're going to get in the vaults from the group and from John and George. And it's something I'm always going to be grateful for. You know, I wouldn't be on the radio for 41 years if I didn't love this catalog. And, you know, the group and the solo combined is, to me, the greatest catalog of all. So,
well, and as I said at the beginning of, you know, of our discussion, that, you know, they didn't repeat themselves in the solo years. You know, that's what I like. That, you know, I mean, sure, some of it sounds Beatlesque. Of course, it's going to, you know, some of it is, but a lot of it isn't. I mean, you know, look, I mean, you mentioned Ringo. I mean, even in his recent solo work, I mean, he's done some reggae. You know, he's delved into that. He's delved into, you know, of course, country. He's delved into, you know, all different kinds of white jazz. I mean, his last one, he delved into that. You know, he's done that.
Free Your Soul. Free Your
Yeah.
Soul. Great song.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's just amazing. And George, you know, I mean, really was a pioneer in world music. And you know, Paul is, you know, we've talked about, delved into all kinds of different music himself, R&B and some world music himself. So it's really it's great to see how, you know, varied their catalog is. You could argue that, you know, they started that in the Beatles too, but they really continued to explore that. So I think they continued with what they did in the Beatles, and that they didn't want to repeat themselves.
Right.
And so, you know, that's another great thing about the solo catalog. It's not boring.
And you already did it with the Beatles. It's already been done. So do something different. You don't need, in my opinion, John and Paul together, you know, helping each other in their solo albums. It'd be nice if they had done a couple of things, maybe for old time's sake. But to me, I like that it's different. And I've said it a million times before. I never regretted that the Beatles split up when they did. I think they split up at the right time, perfectly, and they left behind a perfect catalog. And then they went on in 4 directions to do 4 different adventures of music.
They went out on top. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I like to say that by elevating the status of the solo careers, you're not diminishing what they accomplished as a band at all. You're only making their legacy greater. And it's the greatest legacy of all to me. To be able to make it on your own, which is something that I think many people take for granted. I mean, name any other band where each individual member achieved what the Beatles did on their own. It's extraordinary. It's beyond amazing. You know, can you name any band that where each member had hits on their own, top 10 or number 1? Same thing with albums.
I mean,
I mean that
the closest
speaks volumes.
I think what Matt comes to mind, you know.
Not everyone.
Eagles come to mind. Yeah, not everyone, but yeah, that's why it's tough. You know, it really is. I mean, you could put it in reverse. I think you can make a case for Phil Collins being more successful in the '80s than Genesis' entire 50-year career.
Right.
You know, but that's another story.
If you go back to the early Genesis, then you got to give Peter Gabriel credit for the success he had. Yeah. But anyway, this has been great talking about this.
Yeah.
So, is the sum really greater than the parts?
Let us know.
Oh, you're asking me. You're asking them. Yes, let us know.
That's the beauty of this conversation. We all have opinions, and you guys watching have your own opinion. We want to know what you think. Let us know what you think of our opinions. But be nice.
Hey, we didn't go into any individual songs. I noticed that are better, solo songs that are better than Beatles songs.
Well, you know, I could just off the top of my head just go through John's songs that I think are top tier. That are, you want? I'll do it. It's very
you had to open this can of worms.
Oh boy!
Well,
just when we were gonna get done early too.
Yeah, good. Great job, Joe.
Calico Skies is better than What You're Doing. How's that?
Okay. No, but I
I
would
love
definitely
what you're
say,
doing. I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing also. You know, give me love, give me peace on earth is much better than you like me too much. But I love you like me too much. I think it's an underrated Beatles song.
I
Just
agree
giving you
with you.
examples. There are solo songs that are better than certain Beatles songs.
Right.
It's all
Yeah.
subjective, but
And there's so much stuff from the solo catalog that are amongst the best of that Beatles' entire career.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yep.
not black and white. It's not in one direction
No.
and that's it. You know,
Mm-mm.
Photograph is better than Don't Pass Me By.
Mhm.
I'll agree with you.
Yeah, maybe.
Something's wrong. I just agree with Joe 3 times
Maybe.
in a row. There's something
Oh
wrong.
my
Something's wrong.
God. I think the apocalypse is upon us.
Well, how
Just
to make up
kidding.
for last show?
Yep.
Mm.
Since I already mentioned it, do you want me to just run off just a few songs from John that I
All
think
right.
are the best?
Yeah.
This is
Go
so
ahead.
easy off the top of my head. I would say Cold Turkey, Instant Karma, Mother, Working Class Hero, Isolation, God, Imagine, Jealous Guy, Oh My Love, Give Me Some Truth, How, it's a real favorite of mine.
Mhm.
Out the Blue, I Know, Mind Games, You Are Here, Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out, What You Got, Number 9 Dream, Stealing Glass, yeah, Starting
With the
Over,
horns.
Woman, Beautiful Boy, Watching the Wheels, Nobody Told Me. Those are all amongst the best of John's entire career. That's all off the top of my head, without even thinking.
Wow.
I'd hate to see what happened if you thought about it.
We'd be here
I
for
got a real
several
yeah.
days.
Yes.
I got
we'd be here all
10
night.
tracks. I got 10 tracks real quick before we close out.
I thought it was going to be
This I
better than
think would
some
make
Beatles songs, but all right.
these 10 tracks I think would rival a Beatles album. I think would just be, and this is from 70 to 72. Okay. Now I'm not saying that I see the Beatles playing on these songs. I'm just saying that these tracks are up there with Beatle tracks. And
Right.
then this album would consist of Maybe I'm Amazed, Instant Karma, My Sweet Lord, Another Day, It Don't Come Easy, Imagine, Back Off Boogaloo, New York City, Hi Hi Hi, and the controversial one would be Bangladesh. And I say that because I think that this is something that all of them would rally around and behind George on, because it's it's a special not an event, but it was something that was worldwide felt or whatever, and they would have wanted to partake and help their friend George in creating the song for this situation.
Mhm.
So that's the only reason why I say that. But I think that would be, that album would rival, any Beatle album. That's just
Okay.
my
That's
opinion.
all top tier stuff. I love the fact you put
Yeah.
Bangladesh in there.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you guys want to say?
All right. I haven't had much time to think about this, so I'll just run off a few songs here. All right. I just have Maybe I'm Amazed, Imagine, It Don't Come Easy, My Sweet Lord, Watching the Wheels, Photograph, My Love, Isn't It a Pity? Those are just to start off.
There are many, and not for nothing, but most of us are picking the earlier songs. You notice that's always like around 70, 71, a lot of them.
Mhm.
But this stuff, as we said, if we really
Yeah.
thought about it more in the 80s, 90s, and so forth,
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
I
I
agree.
mean that's
2000s,
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
just off the top of my head. Yeah, there are a lot
Too
more.
Much Rain. There's one.
Oh
Mhm.
God, yeah.
Fantastic.
Hey, what about
Wanderlust.
the end
Yeah.
of the end? It's one of the
Yeah.
Yeah.
greatest songs.
Phenomenal.
And
Yeah.
as we said in our last show, although there may be a few people here opposing it, Little Lamb Dragonfly I put way up there.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yep.
You had to
Yeah.
spell
was-
a good
Okay.
thing.
but you talk
That's
about
cool.
this doing 70s. I just did John, so yeah, most of them had to
Yeah.
be the 70s.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
should
yeah.
have said
Mhm.
Grohl with me as well.
Mhm. Oh
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah, there were a lot of good things. And again, if you don't listen to a lot of the solo stuff, do yourself a favor. Try to
Yeah.
learn it,
Yes.
know it, live it.
Live it.
Love it.
And don't compare it to the Beatles. Just listen to it. And
Yeah,
Exactly. I
get to
find it
know
for
it.
its own merits. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. that puts a wrap on our topic here. Why don't we all go
Mhm.
around and tell everybody what we're up to, starting with Joe. I made you
Thank you,
first.
because I like to be first with this because I never have anything, and it's humiliating to go last.
Oh,
But the
come
thing
on.
is, no, I don't have anything on. Anybody in
Well,
there, no, no, usually I do. I'll have something, there's a show or something, but this time I don't, except my usual videos that I do on Mean Mr. Mayo. And the only thing on the YouTube channel that's changing is I just made an announcement today that I hope I don't regret, that I'm going to try, in addition to all the Beatles, solo Beatles content I have on my YouTube channel, I'm going to try to put everything under one roof. I tried having a movie channel on the side. I'm trying to put it all together. That's not Beatles related, or solo Beatles related, but
hmm,
it's news. That's all I could say. And I've done a few Beatles videos lately, but got some more. I'm going to start doing solo Beatle album reviews again. I did that for a while, petered out, and I'm going to revamp the whole thing. Talk about solo albums again.
okay,
Stay tuned.
good ideas there. Yeah. Tom, how about you?
Well, if you've been keeping up with Two Legs podcast, we had the great, Luca Perazzi on our show, and we talked about his latest book, Music is Ideas. And thank you all for the response for that episode has been great. It's pretty much right at 1,000 views. So thank you very much for everybody for checking it out. And there he is now, Ken. Yeah, he's
Whoa.
ready.
I'm still
Right?
trying to decide if I should get the hard. I didn't order that yet. Or should I get the hardcover? It's out in hardcover too, as well as soft
Hardcover
cover.
is now available on Amazon. Absolutely. That's
Mm,
correct. And
gotta get it.
this past weekend, we did something a little different. Now, don't worry, we're not, steering away from Paul as a solo artist or Beatle or whatnot, but we just did a little something different because I know it's something that a lot of people talk about, and that is, the difference or what is better, the US or the UK Rubber Soul. I mean, a lot of people talk about these two albums, and and there's a lot of people that grew up with one or the other, and and that's where their loyalty lies. And it's a great, we had a lot of great comments on this episode, so we really appreciate everybody that watched and or listened to that, and keep those comments coming. That was a really fun show to do with Al Sussman and Ethan Alexanian, 4 generation of Beatle fans, which was a really fun thing to have with that. And then we've got something coming up with Jude Sutherland Kessler coming up, and then we're going to be doing. A couple weeks ago, we did our favorites opening tracks from Paul's solo canon. Now we're going to go to the closing tracks and then talk about our favorite closing tracks from Paul's canon albums. And I shouldn't. I'll wait to say the next thing, because I'm really excited about that for the next show. So I want to make sure we record it and get it in the books before I mention it. So so I'll hold on to
Paul?
that. So yeah, no, one could only wish. But find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Two Legs Podcast. You can email us at twolegspodcast@gmail.com. And we're getting more subscribers on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, who has subscribed. And if you haven't yet, please go to Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast on YouTube. Check us out and subscribe. And off to the next person.
Okay, that leaves you, the real queen, in my
Thank you.
book, anyway.
Oh, thank you, Ken. Thank you. Well, first of all, you can find us at Talk More Talk right here, of course, on this YouTube channel. And please tell your friends to check us out and subscribe. If all of you watching haven't already, please subscribe. We're trying to get those numbers up. So please go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already.
Up,
You
up,
can
up, 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 up.
up.
Going up.
We're going up.
Going up. If you haven't already, please check us out on Facebook and like us there for all the updates for upcoming episodes and all kinds of other stuff that we post there as well. You can find us on Twitter at talkmoretalk1, the number 1. You can also reach us via email at talkmoresolotalk@gmail.com. If you have ideas for future topics you might want us to consider, feedback, all that kind of stuff, please email us there. You can also find the audio version of this show on virtually any podcast platform you can think of. So if you prefer to listen, I've talked to people who say they listen to us while they're working out, cleaning the house. We're just the perfect accompaniment. We're riding the bus, riding the train. We're just perfect accompaniment for any activity like that you're doing. So check us out there. As far as what I'm doing, next month on June 6th, I'm going to be back on Monmouth University's Tuesday Night Record Club with our good buddy Ken Womack. We are going to be discussing the Cars debut album, which is one of the best debut albums. There isn't a bad track on it, right? So
Bye Bye
we
Love.
will. Yep, that's right. That's
song.
right. Great song. And
Just
so,
what I needed. I'm sorry.
just what I needed.
I'm getting all
Yep.
excited. I like the Cars.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a great, and as I said, one of the best debut albums ever. So we're going to be discussing that June 6th, 7:30 Eastern, and you can register for that. I'll put the register link, if I haven't already, on our Talk More Talk Facebook page. I'll have it on my own Facebook page. It is absolutely free. You just have to register, and it's on Zoom. We are going to have a great time, so I hope you'll join us. Next week, we at Toppermost, the Poppermost, are going to be recording our June 1963 episode, so that will be up soon. Our May 1963 episode will be up soon, and you can check out all our previous episodes by going to our website, which I have up on our Talk More Talk page, or you can join our Toppermost of the Poppermost Facebook page to check out our previous episodes. Hope you check it out and let us know what you think. So I think that's everything I'm up to now.
All right. Thank you, Kit. Plenty there to
Now
tackle.
the real busy man. Now the
Yeah.
real busy man.
A man that never sleeps.
Yes.
That's partly true.
Yeah.
I'm with you, Stephen Schnee. I like Candy-O even better. I'm with you.
Oh, that's
I
a
love
great
Candy.
album
The
too.
song Candy-O is
The
fantastic.
Awesome.
dangerous type.
Yeah. Though that first album is so classic.
Yeah.
Anytime I'm driving in Massachusetts on the radio, you're going to hear the Cars. There's no doubt about it. They're supporting their own band there. As far as me, on my own YouTube channel, which is Ken Michaels Radio, a lot of things going on. Tom mentioned Luca Perassi. I did 2 shows with Luca, one of which was for his new book, Music is Ideas, just talking about Paul in the 70s. Now, his book covers the 70s and 80s, so I will be doing a follow-up with Luca on that, just to talk about the 80s. I also had Luca on with our buddy Sam Wiles of the Paul or Nothing Paul McCartney podcast, and the 3 of us talked about our top 3 underrated McCartney studio albums. And it's just interesting to find out whether we all had different opinions or we shared some of the same ones. I did one like this almost a year ago, and it was a great show. Alan Cozen was a part of it. You might want to check out the old one with that. Also, I had Madeline Baccaro on once again. And she is the author of In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono. And we talked about Yoko Ono's premonitions, things that she brought up in her songs or things that she did in her artwork that later on foresaw the future. Very interesting thing. And
Yeah, I gotta say, Madeline had a really nice Star Trek: The Next Generation type of shirt on that one. I texted her, said I liked it. She goes, "Oh,
Okay.
this is just a work shirt." I liked it.
We'll get the Star Trek fans to watch that one then.
It looked like Picard. Well,
Also,
Picard shirt.
I did a recent another Beatles trivia show with Dylan Seavey, Annie Nichols, your co-host there, Tom, on Two Legs, and Edward Crawford. There'll be another trivia show coming soon. I'd like to try to do maybe one a month. Tomorrow I'll be recording a show. Bob Dylan's birthday is next week, May the 24th. So I will be having our friend Jeff Slate, who is a big Bob Dylan fan, does tributes to Bob in concert, and even interviewed Bob himself. And Annie Nichols coming back, didn't know what a big Dylan fan he is. And
Huge fan.
I wasn't aware of it. And then who else but Dylan Seavey?
And Stevie, of course.
Okay,
He's got the
all
same
to
name
talk
as
about
Bob
Bob Dylan and the Beatles. All their activities together. Well, not all of them. We'd be here for 10 hours doing that show. But you know, the relationship that Dylan had with the Beatles, we're doing a show on that, which should go up tomorrow night. My website, kenmichaelsradio.com. We're right now in the middle of a special contest to win the brand new book, Peter Asher, A Life in Music, signed by Peter Asher and the author, David Jacks. Go to my website, go to the special contest page to find out how to win that. And I also, of course, have my weekly Beatles trivia where you can win one of 10 great prizes. It's the best lineup of prizes I've ever had on that page. Go there right now, the trivia, Beatles trivia and games page. My other podcast show, Things We Said Today, the last show we did was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Red and Blue albums. And so Alan Kozin and Darren DeVivo and myself, we all put together our revised Red and Blue albums for 2023. What changes would we make? Would we add some songs? Would we take out some songs? Kind of sounds like this other podcast show that we listen to every now and then. I don't know where that idea came from, but to update it for 2023. And we'll be doing a show on living in a material world next week for its 50th anniversary. And don't forget, if you want to hear my radio show called Every Little Thing, which covers all the Beatles group and solo recordings, thematic sets, interviews, rarities, you name it. If you've never heard the show before, you can listen to it on demand at WFDU's website, which is WFDU.FM. Type in the name Every Little Thing, and in the archival shows, and you'll have the last 2 week shows there to listen to. I want to remind everybody, by the way, our next show is going to be on June the 5th, because 2 weeks from today, it's Memorial Day, and I'm sure many of you will be, you know, out with the family, taking the day off. So we'll be doing another show on June 5th and talking about living in a material world. My all-time favorite album from anybody.
What? Never heard that before.
And it's a solo album. It's a solo
Ken
album.
is so excited.
Wow. And I got him moderated.
Yep, no pressure.
No pressure.
And by the way, if you want to get in touch with me, my email address is really easy. everylittlething@att.net. Any comments you want to make about any of my shows? If you want to make a comment about this show or a suggestion, of course, you can write to us too. But a big thank you to all of you for watching this tonight. This has been a tremendous conversation. A lot of great insights from all three of you. I'm eager to find out what you guys have to say about it in your comments. I'll be reading them after the show, probably, and later in the week. But tell all your friends about this, any Beatle fans that you know, if you want to really get them to explore the solo catalog of the Beatles. This is definitely the show to do it with. We cover all four of them here on the show. And thanks to all of you for watching. Thanks to you guys for being a part of it. And thanks for getting on the right thing with us. See you next time.
Bye.